My son slid a laminated summer schedule beside my plate while the blueberry cobbler was still warm. That cobbler was his father's recipe. Paul used to say the secret was a little lemon zest and not rushing the berries. I had made it every Memorial Day since he passed, because some habits are less about food and more about keeping a person in the room. We were sitting on the screened porch of the lake house, the same porch where Paul had sanded every railing by hand. Mark sat across from me with his wife, Brooke, beside him. My granddaughter Lily was picking at the edge of her napkin, quiet, the way young people get when adults are saying things they know are wrong, but do not yet know how to stop. At first, I thought the paper was a menu, or maybe a grocery list for the 4th of July weekend. Then I saw the heading. Summer Lake House Schedule. Mark's name was written across 2 weekends in June. Brooke's sister had one in July. A couple I barely knew had Labor Day. There was even a line that said, rental trial weekend, as if my home had become a business plan between bites of dessert. My name appeared once. Mom, flexible weekdays. I looked at that line for a long second. Flexible weekdays. As if I were a visitor who could be fitted in around everyone else's convenience. Mark cleared his throat and gave me the smile people use when they have already decided what is best for you. Mum, he said, be honest. A place like this is wasted on one person. The porch went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Not the kind where people look around because someone has crossed a line. It was worse than that. It was the kind of quiet where everyone already knew the line had been crossed. But nobody wanted to be the one to say it. Brooke reached over and touched Mark's arm, not to stop him, but to soften him. We're not taking anything from you, she said. We're just making it useful again. Useful. I looked past them, through the screen, to the cedar swing Paul had built for me after my knee surgery. It still hung beneath the old maple, moving a little in the lake breeze. I folded my napkin carefully and set it beside my plate. Then I looked at my son and said, maybe you're right. What they didn't know was that I had already seen the folder. Brooke thought she left hidden upstairs. No one reached for the schedule right away. That was the first thing I noticed. Not Mark, not Brooke, not even Lily, though her eyes kept moving from the paper to my face like she was waiting for me to say what everyone else was pretending not to hear. I picked up the serving spoon and added another small helping of cobbler to Brooke's plate. Coffee? I asked. My voice sounded normal. Maybe too normal. Brooke smiled quickly, the way people smile when they think a difficult moment has passed in their favor. That would be lovely, Nora, she said. Mark did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the edge of the table, rubbing his thumb over a water ring on the wood his father had sanded smooth 30 years before. I stood, carried the coffee pot from the kitchen, and poured each cup slowly. Cream for Brooke, black for Mark, a splash of milk for Lily, though she barely touched hers. Around me, the conversation began again. Brooke mentioned how nice the porch would look with lighter cushions. Mark said the dock could bring in good weekend money if managed properly. Brooke's sister laughed about how the guest rooms were going to waste most of the year. And I kept listening. That is something people forget about quiet women. We hear everything. I heard the word future more than once. Future weekends, future updates, future use. But no one asked about my future. I looked down at the laminated schedule again. It was too neat to be casual, too organized to be a suggestion. Dates had been chosen, names had been assigned. Even the weekends I usually spent alone had been spoken for. That was when I understood. Mark had not made an unfortunate comment. Brooke had not softened it by accident. This was not a conversation. It was a plan, and they had brought it to my table because they believed my silence meant yes. I folded the schedule once, then once more, and set it beside my plate. I did not cry. Not there. Not in front of people who had already mistaken my patience for permission. I was 71 that summer, old enough to know when a room had changed, but not so old that I couldn't understand what was happening in front of me. People sometimes talk to a widow like grief has made her simple. Like losing a husband means you also lost your sense. I had been a school secretary for 32 years. I knew how to read faces across a counter. I knew when a child was lying about a note from home, when a parent was holding back tears, and when someone wanted something but was trying to make it sound like kindness. So no, I was not confused at that table. I was Paul Whitfield's wife for 46 years. I was Mark's mother. I was Lily's grandmother. I was the woman who remembered every permission slip Mark forgot in his backpack, every fever he ran as a child, every winter coat we bought one size too big so it would last 2 seasons. Mark had not always been careless. That was part of what hurt. I remembered the boy who used to bring me lake stones in his pockets because he thought each one looked like a heart. I remembered him falling asleep against my shoulder after long days in the sun. I remembered Paul teaching him how to hold a hammer, how to tie a proper knot, how to rinse mud from his shoes before stepping inside. A mother does not stop seeing the child inside the grown man. Sometimes that is what makes the truth hardest to accept. Paul and I never had much money, not the kind people brag about. We saved in small ways. Coffee at home, used cars, curtains, I hemmed myself, vacations that were more picnic baskets than hotel rooms. We stretched every paycheck until it almost squeaked. The lake house was our one dream that became real. It was not grand. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 small room in the back, a kitchen with cabinets Paul painted twice because I didn't like the first shade of yellow. The porch floor creaked near the screen door. The dock leaned a little to the left, no matter how often Paul fixed it. But to me, it was beautiful because his hands were everywhere. He built the pine table we ate from that night. He replaced the dock steps after Mark slipped there at 12 and came up laughing with mud on both knees. He built the cedar swing after my knee surgery, so I could sit outside without walking down the hill to the water. After Paul died, people told me the house would be too much. Maybe they were right, in practical ways. The taxes came every year whether I was lonely or not. The roof needed work. The water heater quit one March morning. Every summer visit ended with sheets to wash, crumbs under cushions, and trash bags full of everybody else's good time. But I kept it. I kept it because it felt like keeping a promise. I used to think keeping that house open meant keeping my family close. I did not yet understand they were coming for the house, not for me. Looking back, the change did not happen all at once. That is how people get away with taking more than they should. They do it slowly enough that you keep making excuses for them. At first, Mark would call and ask, "Mom, would it be all right if we came up this weekend?" I loved those calls. I would change the sheets, buy the cereal Lily liked, make sure there were fresh towels in the upstairs bathroom. I would put a pitcher of sweet tea in the refrigerator and tell myself the house felt alive again. Then the asking became announcing. "We're coming Friday after work. Brooke's sister might join us. Some friends may stop by Saturday. You don't mind, do you?" That last part always came after the decision had already been made. I minded sometimes. Of course I did. I was older, not made of stone. Sometimes my hip ached. Sometimes I wanted a quiet weekend with my book and the sound of the lake. Sometimes I did not want to wash 6 extra towels or clean sunscreen off the bathroom sink. But I said yes. Because mothers are taught that being needed is close enough to being loved. Brooke began leaving things behind. First it was a beach bag, then extra sandals, then a plastic bin labelled lake stuff, tucked under the stairs as if storage space in my home had become community property. One summer, I came in from watering the geraniums and found her rearranging my kitchen shelves. "I'm just making things easier," she said, holding my mixing bowls like she had discovered a problem. I smiled and told her it was fine. It was not fine. Brooke was not a monster. I want to be fair about that. She worked hard, kept a careful house, and worried constantly about how things looked from the outside. Her sister had married into money, and I think Brooke spent more time than she admitted, trying not to feel small beside her. The lake house gave her something to show people. A place to photograph. A place to say, without saying it, that she had arrived somewhere. That did not excuse what she did. But it explained the polish on her cruelty. She rarely demanded. She suggested. She rarely insulted. She worried. She rarely pushed. She organized. Mark started talking about the house differently too. He called it the family place when he spoke to friends. He mentioned the taxes as if he paid them. He shook his head at the dock and said, "Mom, this is a lot for someone your age." Someone your age. Those words sound small until they start gathering around you like dust. They loved the porch. They loved the lake. They loved the table Paul built and the cobbler I baked and the clean beds waiting upstairs. But fewer and fewer times did anyone say, "Thank you, Mom." I had become the keeper of their comfort. The woman who opened the door, stocked the refrigerator, folded the towels, and stayed out of the way. And somewhere along the line, I stopped feeling like the owner of my own peace. The cedar swing was still hanging from the old maple when Mark said the house was wasted on one person. I could see it through the porch screen, moving gently in the breeze, the way it had moved on quiet mornings when Paul was still here and the coffee was still hot beside us. He built that swing after my knee surgery. I had been stubborn, of course. I told him I was fine, that I could walk down the slope to the water if I took my time. Paul just looked at me over his glasses and said, "Nora, loving you means making the hard things easier." 3 days later, he came home with cedar boards in the back of his truck. He sanded every piece by hand. He measured the chains twice. He tested the seat before he let me sit in it, as if he were building a bridge instead of a swing. When he finally helped me lower myself onto it, he stood back with sawdust on his shirt and said, "Now the lake can come to you." That was Paul. He loved impractical ways. Fixed hinges, sharpened knives, filled the gas tank, left notes beside medicine bottles. He was not a man of speeches, but I never had to wonder whether I mattered. The other thing Paul believed in was paperwork. "Keep every paper where you can find it," he used to tell me. "Memories are for the heart, records are for the world." So in the bottom drawer of the small desk by the kitchen window, I kept a green folder. It was not fancy. The corner was bent, and Paul had written Lake House across the tab in his square, careful handwriting. Inside were the deed, property tax records, insurance papers, repair receipts, permits for the dock, and every major bill I had paid after he died. There was also a letter. Paul wrote it near the end, when his hands had become too thin and the house had started sounding different, because we both knew one of us would be left in it alone. I had read that letter only once. Afterward, I tucked it back inside the folder because some words are too heavy to carry every day. That letter stayed in that folder for 9 years. I did not know I would need it until my son used the word wasted. After that summer, Mark stopped pretending the lake house was just a place to visit. He began talking about it, like it was a sleeping investment. "You know, Mom," he said one Saturday while standing on the dock with his hands on his hips, "places like this can bring in real money now. Weekend rentals. Family retreats. People pay a fortune to sit by water." I was beside him, holding a basket of wet towels against my hip. "I don't need strangers in my home," I said. He gave a little laugh, not cruel exactly, but dismissive. "It wouldn't have to feel like that. The house could pay for itself." That phrase stayed with me. Pay for itself. As if it had not already been paid for in Paul's overtime, my careful grocery budgets, and 30 years of saying no to things we wanted, so we could keep one thing we loved. Mark had reasons. That is what made it confusing at first. His mortgage had gone up. Lily's college years were coming closer. He had taken a pay cut during a company restructuring and never quite caught back up. I knew there were credit card balances he did not talk about, because once, when I helped with Lily's dental bill, he looked more ashamed than grateful. I understood pressure. I had lived with pressure most of my life. But pressure does not give a son permission to treat his mother like a solution. Brooke started bringing up condos. Not directly at first. She was too polished for that. She would send me listings and say, "Just something to consider, Nora. 1 floor, no stairs, close to doctors." Then she would add, "And Mark would worry less." It sounded like concern if you did not listen too closely, but I had learnt to listen closely. One weekend, they brought friends without asking. Another time, Brooke's sister came with her 2 children and stayed until Monday, leaving sticky handprints on the glass door and a pile of damp towels in the laundry room. Later that night, Lily showed me a picture on her phone. Brooke's sister had posted it online. There was my porch, my lake, Paul's table in the corner. The caption said, "Our lake getaway never disappoints." Our. I smiled for Lily because she looked embarrassed, but something inside me folded in on itself. Mark grew bolder after that. He mentioned repairs more often. He talked about insurance. He asked where I kept important house papers. Then one afternoon, while I was rinsing blueberries at the sink, he said, "Mum, have you ever thought about adding my name to the deed, just for convenience? In case something happens." The water kept running over my hands. I looked out the window at the cedar swing. "For whose convenience?" I asked. He blinked, then smiled like I had misunderstood. "For yours," he said, "so you don't have to handle everything alone." But I had been handling everything alone for 9 years. That was when Lily started getting quieter around them. And that was when concern stopped sounding like concern. It started sounding like control. But the real insult did not happen at dinner. It happened upstairs, in a folder Brooke forgot to take home. They left Sunday afternoon with the usual goodbye hugs. Brooke kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "Think about what we talked about, Nora. We just want you comfortable." Mark squeezed my shoulder and told me not to worry so much. Then they drove away, with coolers in the trunk, leftover cobbler wrapped in foil, and my silence tucked neatly behind them, like permission. The house felt different after they left. Not peaceful, emptied. I stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to the refrigerator hum and the old porch screen tap softly in the wind. Then I started cleaning, because that is what I had always done after they visited. I washed cups, folded napkins, wiped crumbs from the table Paul built. Upstairs, I stripped the guest bed. That was when I saw the folder. It was tucked halfway under Brooke's overnight bag, which she must have forgotten in the corner. A cream-coloured folder with a silver clip and neat printed pages inside. I should have left it alone. At least that is what polite women are taught to think. But the first page had my address on it. Not Mark's, not Brooke's. Mine. The title read, "Lake House Transition Plan." I sat down on the edge of the bed before I turned the page. There were renovation notes, paint colours, rental estimates, suggestions for maximising summer income. A list of minor repairs labelled before guest launch. One page showed the upstairs bedrooms renamed like hotel rooms. Then I saw it. Convert current primary bedroom into premium Lakeview suite. Move Nora's belongings to back room until condo arrangements are finalised. For a moment, I could not feel my hands. My bedroom. The room where Paul and I had slept under the old blue quilt. The room where I had listened to him breathe during those last difficult nights. The room where I still kept his robe, folded in the bottom drawer, because some grief does not need to be explained. They had not forgotten me. They had placed me. I looked through the window at the cedar swing beneath the maple tree. I remembered Paul's hands guiding the chain through the branch, his shirt dusted with sawdust, his voice saying, "Now the lake can come to you." And there I was, sitting in my own house, reading a plan that moved me out of my life. I did not scream. I did not call Mark. I placed the papers back in order, carried the folder downstairs, and laid it beside Paul's green lake house file. That was when I stopped waiting to be chosen. The next morning, I made coffee before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, I had barely slept at all. I kept seeing that line in Brooke's folder, the one that moved my life into the back room, as neatly as if I were a lamp. They had decided no longer matched the furniture. I sat at the kitchen table with Paul's green folder on one side and Brooke's cream-coloured folder on the other. Love and proof. That was what they looked like to me. At 8:30, I called a real estate attorney in town. His name was Mr. Halpin. Paul had used him years before for a boundary issue with the neighbour's dock, and I remembered that he spoke plainly, which I appreciated more than charm. His assistant asked what the appointment was about. I said, "I need to know exactly what I own and exactly what I should protect." There was a pause on the other end. Then she gave me a time for Wednesday morning. When I walked into that office 2 days later, I carried both folders in a canvas tote bag. I had the deed, property tax bills, insurance papers, repair receipts, Paul's letter, the unsigned papers Mark once said were just for convenience, and Brooke's lake house transition plan. Mr. Halpin read quietly. That was another thing I appreciated. He did not interrupt my pain with sympathy before he understood the facts. After a few minutes, he tapped the deed with his finger. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "this property is yours, fully yours. Your son has no ownership interest here." I had known it. But hearing it out loud made something inside me settle. Then he looked at the papers Mark had brought months earlier. "I'm glad you didn't sign these." I looked at my hands in my lap. "So am I," I said. We talked about my trust. We talked about who could make decisions if I became ill. We talked about beneficiary designations, account access, and what selling the house would actually involve. Not in a rush. Not like a movie. Just step by step, the way real life works when you are trying not to make a mistake. I did not list the house that day. I asked for an appraisal. I asked what notices I would need. I asked how to make sure no one could interfere. And when I left that office, I did not feel powerful in some dramatic way. I felt steady. They thought I had gone quiet. I had only gone careful. The first thing Mark noticed was that I stopped answering quickly. Not rudely, not coldly. I simply stopped treating every request like it was already approved before he asked. He called the following Friday. "Mum, we were thinking about coming up next weekend," he said. "Just us. Maybe Brooke's sister for one night." I was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the appraisal card Mr. Halpern had recommended. "That doesn't work for me," I said. There was silence on the line. "Oh," Mark said, "you have plans?" "Yes." I did not explain that my plan was to sit in my own house without washing anyone's towels. He gave a small laugh. "Well, we can work around you." That sentence told me everything. Work around me. In my house? "No," I said gently. "The house is unavailable that weekend." He did not like that. I could hear it in the way he breathed through his nose. A few days later, Brooke called. Her voice was sweet enough to frost a cake. "Nora, I hope you didn't take anything the wrong way at dinner. Mark worries about you. We all do." "That's kind," I said. "And have you thought more about the condo idea? There's a lovely place near town. 1 floor. Very manageable." "I'll think about what is best for me," I said. Another pause. Not because I had said anything harsh, but because I had left no opening for her to step through. After that, the calls came more often. Mark asked about the dock. Brooke asked if I needed help sorting closets. Mark wondered where I kept the spare keys. Brooke mentioned that paint samples were still in her car, just in case. I answered less. I explained less. I apologized not at all. For the first time in years, I began to understand how much of my life had been held together by my automatic yes. And when that yes disappeared, they felt the floor shift. They did not know about the attorney. They did not know about the appraisal. They did not know I had read Paul's letter again. They only knew that the woman they had counted on to bend had suddenly become very still. I read Paul's letter again, the night before the appraisal. I waited until the house was quiet. Not just quiet the way a room gets when people leave, but the deeper kind of quiet that lets old memories come walking back in. I took the green folder from the desk drawer and carried it out to the porch. The cedar swing moved in the dark beyond the screen, just enough for the chains to make that soft, familiar sound. Paul's handwriting was weaker in the letter than it had been on the folder tab. The letters leaned a little. Some words were pressed harder than others, as if he had rested between sentences. My Nora, it began. I sat there with the porch lamp glowing beside me and read every line. He wrote that the lake house had never been about wood, windows, or shoreline. It had been about peace. It had been where we brought Mark when he was small, where we rested after hard years, where we learned that ordinary days could still feel rich if you had coffee, weather, and someone you trusted beside you. Then he wrote something that made me put the page down. Do not let anyone turn your peace into their plan. I covered my mouth with my hand and looked out toward the lake. Paul had known. Maybe not the details, not Brooks' folder, not Mark's schedule, not the word wasted spoken over warm cobbler, but he had known me. He knew I would give until giving became a habit. He knew I would excuse people I loved. He knew I might confuse being needed with being cherished. That was why, 2 years before he died, he had moved the deed fully into my name. At the time, he said it was just practical. Simpler that way. Less trouble later. Now I understood. It had been protection. I thought of all the years after he passed. The checks I wrote when Mark's furnace broke. The dental bill I helped cover for Lily. The holidays I hosted, even when my back ached. The extra groceries. The quiet loans I never called loans. The birthdays, the beds made, the porch lights left on. I had never kept score. But they had started counting what they thought they were owed. Paul had left me one sentence I would not understand until the day Mark said, "The house was wasted on me. If they ever make you feel like a guest in the home we built for your peace, let it go before it takes you with it." After the appraisal, things moved slowly. That was important to me. Nothing happened in a burst of anger. Nothing happened overnight. There were phone calls, documents, signatures, questions, inspections, and quiet mornings when I almost changed my mind because I saw Lily's old height marks inside the pantry door. Selling a house that held your marriage is not like selling an old chair. Some days, I stood in the kitchen and remembered Paul buttering toast at the counter. Some nights, I walked through the upstairs rooms and wondered whether I was betraying the past by leaving it. Then I would look at Brooks' transition plan again, and I would remember. I was not leaving love behind. I was refusing to let other people use love as a leash. A few offers came in after Mr. Halpin connected me with a local agent who handled everything quietly and properly. One buyer wanted to tear down the porch and build something modern. Another wanted it strictly for weekly rentals. Their offers were higher than I expected, but every time I read them, the house felt smaller somehow. Then one offer came with a letter. It was from a woman named Ruth Bennett. She was a retired hospice nurse, a widow. She wrote that she was not looking for a party house or an investment flip. She wanted a quiet, seasonal retreat for caregivers and widows, women who had spent years holding everyone else together and needed a place to breathe. She asked about the swing. Not the rental income, not the number of beds, the swing. I read her letter twice at the kitchen table. Then I folded it and placed it beside Paul's. By the time Mark came back with the contractor, the lake house no longer belonged to me. Not in the way he thought. The papers had been signed. The closing date had passed. Ruth had walked through each room with careful eyes and asked me about Paul, the dock, the swing, and the best place to watch the sunrise. She had not once told me what I should do with my own life. That mattered more than I expected. Mark called on a Thursday morning and said they were coming by Saturday. "We'll just walk through with someone," he said. "Nothing major, just to get ideas." I said, "Saturday at 10 is fine." He sounded relieved, like the old version of me had returned. At 10 sharp, 2 cars pulled into the gravel drive. Mark stepped out first, carrying a yellow legal pad. Brooke followed with a canvas tote full of paint samples. A man I did not know climbed out of the second car, wearing work boots and holding a measuring tape. Brooke smiled when she saw me through the screen door. "Oh, Nora," she said, "you look tired. This is exactly why we need to simplify things." I opened the door and let them in. The contractor started to introduce himself, but stopped when he saw Mr. Halpin sitting at the kitchen table. My attorney stood politely. Mark's smile faded. "Mum," he said slowly, "what's going on?" I was already seated at the table with the green folder in front of me. Paul's brass key lay beside it, catching a small square of morning light. "Sit down, Mark," I said. Brooke laughed once too quickly. "Nora, if this is about the schedule, I think everyone got a little emotional. We were only trying to help." I looked at her tote bag. "Is that what the paint samples are for?" Her face tightened. Mark set his legal pad down. "Mom, nobody is taking anything. We're just trying to make the house work for everyone." "For everyone," I repeated. He nodded, grateful for what he thought was agreement. I opened Brooke's cream-colored folder and placed the first page on the table. "Lake House Transition Plan." Brooke went still. Mark's eyes moved over the title, then quickly to his wife. I turned to the page I had folded at the corner. "Maybe you can explain something to me," I said. No one answered. I tapped the line with one finger. Why did helping me require moving my belongings out of my bedroom? The contractor looked down at his boots. Brooke whispered, "That was just an idea." Mark's face flushed. "You weren't supposed to see that." And there it was. Not an apology. Not surprise. Just annoyance that I had found the truth, before they were ready to dress it up as concern. Mark pushed back from the table as if the chair had burned him. "That was private," he said. I looked at Brooke's folder, then at my son. "No," I said quietly. "My home was private. My bedroom was private. This was a plan about me that did not include me." Brooke folded her arms. "Nora, you're making this sound ugly." It was ugly before I named it. Mark turned toward Mr. Halpin. "I don't know what she told you, but this is a family matter." Mr. Halpin did not move. "It is a property matter, Mr. Whitfield," he said, and Mrs. Whitfield asked me to be present. Mark looked back at me then, his face tight with the kind of anger people show when they realize charm is no longer working. "Mum," he said, "you can't just shut us out of our family house." There it was. Our family house. I opened the green folder and took out the deed. The paper was old enough that the creases knew where to fold. "This is the warranty deed," I said. "Your father transferred full ownership to me before he died." Mark stared at it. I turned it so he could see my name. "Mine, Mark. Legally and completely." His mouth opened, then closed. For a second, he looked younger. Not innocent, exactly, but smaller. Brooke leaned forward. "That doesn't mean she should make emotional decisions." I almost smiled at that. "Brooke," I said, "the emotional decision was keeping this house open for 9 years after Paul died. What I did next was practical." Mark's voice rose just enough to crack. "Dad would never have wanted you to do this." That hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, because he thought his father's memory was another key he could use. I took Paul's letter from the folder. My hands trembled only once, and I let them. I had earned the right to tremble. Your father thought about this house, Mark, I said. He thought about what would happen to me after he was gone. I unfolded the page. The room went still. Then I read the line Paul had left me. If they ever make you feel like a guest in the home we built for your peace, let it go before it takes you with it. No one spoke. Even Brooke looked away. I placed the letter down and took out the last document. The house has been sold. Mark blinked. Listed? Sold. Brooke's face changed first. Her eyes went to the paint samples, then to the contractor, then back to me. To who? She asked. A woman named Ruth Bennett. Mark shook his head. A stranger? Yes, I said. A stranger who asked about the house before she asked what she could get from it. Brooke's voice came out thin. What about the summer? I closed the folder. The summer is no longer yours to schedule. The contractor quietly picked up his tape measure and stepped toward the door. Nobody stopped him. The hardest part was not watching Mark lose the house. It was watching him realize he had lost the right to call it his. After the contractor left, Brooke stood first. She gathered her paint samples so quickly that several slipped from the tote and scattered across the floor like little pieces of a future that had never belonged to her. This is unbelievable, she said. I did not answer. Mark was still sitting at the table, staring at the closed green folder. You sold it, he said, but not like a question anymore. Yes. To a stranger. To someone who respected what it was. Brooke gave a bitter little laugh. So that's it? You're just going to divide the family over a house? I looked at her then. No, Brooke. The house did not divide this family, the way you planned around me did. Her cheeks coloured, but she said nothing. Mark stood slowly. Anger came first. It always does when people are caught before they are ready to be sorry. You should have talked to me, he said. I did, I told him. For years. You just thought listening meant waiting for me to finish. That quieted him. Not enough to make him apologize. Not yet. But enough to make him look away. They left without hugging me. I watched their car disappear down the gravel road, and I waited for the sadness to crush me. It came. But not alone. Relief came with it. That surprised me most. That evening, Lily called. Her voice was small. Grandma? Hi, sweetheart. I saw the schedule before dinner, she said. I didn't like that your name was only on weekdays. I closed my eyes. You are not responsible for grown people's choices, I told her. I should have said something. You're young, I said. But remember how it felt. That will help you become the kind of woman who does say something one day. She cried a little. So did I. Later that night, Mark sent a message. It began with, I'm sorry you felt hurt. Then came the explanations. The worry, the money pressure, the claim that he had only wanted to keep the house in the family. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table. There had been a time when I would have answered immediately, smoothing everything over so no one had to sit too long with what they had done. But not that night. That night, I let the silence belong to me. I did not move far. That surprised some people. They expected me to run from the town, from the memories, from the questions people asked in grocery store aisles, when they had heard only half the story. But I had spent too many years being pushed around by other people's comfort. I was not about to let shame choose my next home. I bought a small cottage, 12 minutes from town, on a quiet street with maple trees and neighbors who waved without needing to know my business. It had one bedroom downstairs, a bright kitchen, and a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a pot of geraniums. No lake. No dock. No upstairs rooms waiting for people who came with coolers and left with leftovers. Just enough space for me to live without being managed. Mr. Halpern helped me update everything properly. My accounts, my trust, the emergency contacts. The papers people do not like to think about, until someone else starts thinking about them for you. I set aside money for Lily's education, but not in a way anyone could use for something else. It would go directly to her school when the time came. That felt right. Love should help a child rise. It should not become another door for greedy hands. A week before I handed over the lake house keys, Ruth Bennett met me on the porch. She looked out at the cedar swing and said, "Would you like to take it?" I touched the chain with my fingers. "I didn't think I could," I said. "It belongs with you," she told me. "A house can change hands. That kind of love shouldn't have to." So the swing came with me. A neighbour's son helped hang it beneath the maple tree outside my new cottage. It looked smaller there, without the lake behind it. But when I sat down, the woods still held me the same way. That first morning, I drank coffee on my new porch and listened to leaves instead of water. I missed the lake. Of course I did. But I did not miss waiting for footsteps that came only when people wanted something. I did not miss wondering who had a key. And I did not miss feeling like a guest in my own life. For the first time in a long time, my home was quiet because I chose quiet. People sometimes think a house is wasted if every room is not filled. I used to believe that too, in a way. I thought empty bedrooms meant failure. I thought a quiet kitchen meant loneliness. I thought if I kept enough towels folded, enough food in the refrigerator, enough beds ready, then my family would keep finding their way back to me. But a house is not wasted because one person lives there. Sometimes one person is healing. Sometimes one person is remembering. Sometimes one person is resting after a lifetime of making room for everyone else. The lake house was never wasted on me. It held me through the hardest years of my life. It gave me mornings when grief sat beside me instead of on top of me. It gave me a place to hear Paul's voice in the creak of the porch floor and the swing moving under the maple tree. I do miss the lake sometimes. I miss the way the water looked before sunrise. I miss the sound of rain on the roof. I miss the long shadows across the porch in September. But I do not miss being treated like a placeholder. I do not miss watching people measure my home while forgetting my heart was still living in it. And I do not miss pretending that being needed was the same as being loved. Mark and I are not where we used to be. Maybe one day we will find a new way to speak to each other. Maybe we will not. I have learned not to build my peace on someone else's apology. Lily still visits. Sometimes we sit on Paul's cedar swing with coffee for me and lemonade for her. She asks questions about her grandfather, and I tell her the truth gently. He was a man who knew love was not just what you said, it was what you protected. That is what I finally did. I protected what was left of my life. Not out of anger, out of respect. Protecting your peace is not revenge. It is self-respect. And being quiet was never the same as being weak. Sometimes it only meant I was done explaining my worth. Have you ever had to walk away from something you loved just to protect your peace?